Here we are. We now find ourselves in the fourth week of January, 2023. Now that I have all of my garden beds planned and where I want to plant and what I want to plant, this week I have spent time filling out when I'm going to start seeds and when I'm going to be transplanting. The reason I do this now, and I started a few years ago, is that it really keeps things smoother during the growing year. Because if you wait until April or May and then you don't have anything pre-planned for fall either, then the season really rushes past you and you don't have a chance to get stuff in the ground in order to grow crops in time to feed your family. So I like writing out the schedule for the whole year all at once in the winter for when I'm going to be planting, transplanting items. As far as other aspects of our life, we do not plan a year, even really a month in advance. A month is pretty the furthest out we'll plan. And that's because life changes, things happen. My husband's self-employed. We just don't like to book things until we know for sure when he's going to be off. But the garden only happens for certain seasons, and you have to be ready for it. You may be able to tell by the end of this video that I am a planner and I do like list making. Historically, I do that a lot, but it's usually on paper that gets thrown away. I've never kept it in a book or kept records. 2 years ago, as a New Year's resolution challenge, I did keep for the whole year a very detailed journal all about my life, day to day, week to week, month to month, for the purpose of giving that as a gift to my children when they're adults, so they can see what a year in the life of mom was like. At the end of that year, I realized I really liked having everything in one book, and I liked the record keeping, and I liked being able to look back and see my growth or see where I wanted to improve things. So in 2022, I continued on, maybe not in quite as much detail because that year I was also gifted a garden planner, and I thought I would challenge myself to track my garden really closely because I had never done that before. And then I also had my homeschool teacher planner. And by the end of last year, I was pretty tired of trying to keep up with 3 books. It was too much, and I wasn't really being faithful to them the way I wanted to be because there was 3 of them. So last year, at the end of the year, I started looking for one planner that was big enough and had enough of the pages that I was interested in using that I could use for everything, all in one book. Personal, schooling, family plans, gardening, personal tracking, everything. The planner that I ended up ordering is an Erin Condren teacher lesson planner. And I appreciated seeing how a lot of other people online use the lesson planner, even though they aren't teachers. So I liked the ideas of how to personalize the book for me. And on the inside first page, the All About Me page, I just listed a bunch of phone numbers that I wanted to have in case my phone should die, because who really remembers phone numbers anymore? I have my goals for the year, a wish list. On the events and volunteers page, I'm just keeping different quotes that I hear or read throughout the year that I would like to remember. The next 2 pages I turned into specific trackers for the whole year. One page is for my garden spending to see how much I really spend on the garden, and the other page is for personal health markers. So each month I wanted to measure and take my heart rate, blood pressure, weight, measurements, that stuff. On the 2 pages that spread out and show you the whole year, I'm mostly using for just tracking the days that we do schoolwork and also penciling in different field trips or family entertainment activities that we might want to do each month, but not necessarily not knowing what day yet we want to do them. The next 3 pages include monthly sections as well as graph paper. And I'm mostly using those for recipes. As I see different recipes online or videos throughout the year, I jot them down. And then later on when I have a chance to try them, if they pass the test, then they will get copied over into my recipe book. And if they don't, I will X them out and never try them again. And I also have some tracking for our food storage, our inventory, so I know what I have and what I need to order or pick up. And the last page of those 3, I have it set aside specifically for my personal prayer requests. I like to write them down all in one spot as the year goes by, because when I look back every few months and definitely at the end of the year, I like to look over the prayers and see if God has answered them and how He's answered them. And that's a faith builder for me. So I reserved one page for that. And now we move into the pages that repeat every month for the rest of the year. So the first few pages of every month, there's 3.5 pages of just plain lined paper. And I'm using those sections just for my personal thoughts and journaling. I don't always do it every day, but when I do, I just write the date and I write as much as I want to, 1 line, 2 lines, 5 lines. And then the next time I write, I just start right underneath that one and continue. So obviously we're only 4 weeks into January. There's a few days left and I haven't quite filled up 2 pages. So I should have some extra at the end of this month. And at the bottom of that 3rd page, there's a section that says dates to remember. And there's one for each month. And so it's dates to remember in January, February, March. And that is where I'm going to be recording what dates I want to remember to start my seeds or to do my transplants. So there's one for each month. And so that's where I'm going to show you those breakdowns at the end of this video. And the reason I'm recording them there instead of on the calendar on the next page or instead of on the weekly section is because I do prefer to write on those sections as things happen. I don't want to have to erase stuff later necessarily. So just for what I'm hoping to do and planning to do, I have in that one section. So then you turn over and you have the calendar for the whole month. And like I said, there I record what's happened each day. I might write the temperatures for that day, what the weather was like. If we went somewhere important or we did something important that I really want to remember, I'll write it there and then I'll highlight on it. That way in the future, if I need to remember when something was done, I can flip to that whole month and see the day. But I am also recording as I start stuff. So on my January 16th, I wrote that I started the Texas early grano and the red burgundy onions. And then I put a highlight around that day. And I'll do that throughout the year so that it really stands out to me when I started different crops. And that way, at the end of the year, I can look back and say, okay, I started this crop on this day. I transplanted it on this day here in the future. And then was it successful? What was the success? And that lets me adjust next year if I need to shift things around or not. And it will also help with the science experiment I'm planning to do with planting by the moon this year. But more about that in a few minutes. So after the monthly spread, then you get to the pages that are set up for weekly calendars. And I really appreciated learning from other people that instead of following the 5 days that were set up for the rows with 6 categories across for the columns, that I could switch them. I'm not very creative usually on my own, so I liked seeing that in others. So I have mine switched so that the 6 columns across the top are for Sunday through Friday. We have a 6-day work week. We rest on Sabbath, so a lot of the stuff that I would be tracking, I'm not going to be tracking on Sabbath anyway. And the 5 rows going down, I have 2 set up for homeschool tracking, 1 for my to-do list items for each day to check off, and then I have 1 for meals and 1 for all my garden plans, recording what I've done, what I want to do, things like that. And then that end column is just for different notes that I would use during the day, or if I do want to record what we ate on Sabbath or what we want to eat on Sabbath. Okay, we are nearing the end of the tour through how I'm using my planner this year. The last section in the Erin Condren Teacher Lesson Planner says checklist. And when I saw this in different people's videos, I was so excited. That really sold me on this planner because it's the same format that I had set up for myself in the planner that I made that I kept 2 years ago. And this came with, I could be wrong, it came with I think 7 of these checklists, but you could order extra. So I chose to order extra because I wanted to have 1 for each month. So across the top of mine, I have the days of the month, 1 through, whatever, if it's February 1 through 28. And then going down on all the rows, I have written lots of different stuff, different items, not necessarily connected to each other, things that I want to track for myself or my household, how I'm managing different things. So some of the items that I have in January are the different exercises that I want to be sure I'm doing, or at least be aware of how many I'm doing, how often, different herbs and supplements that I need to remember to take. If I'm getting enough water each day, I write down how many cups I drink. I write down or I check off if I got at least 30 minutes of sunshine, which is sometimes harder to do in the winter, especially on rainy days. I'm keeping track of how often I'm reading the book that I want to read for the beginning of this year. I'm also tracking the percentage of solar power usage that we do each day, whether we're completely on the grid or 50% on solar, 100% on solar. I just want to have that for the whole month. So when the bill comes, I can kind of get an idea of what we're paying for. I also have a checklist for the kids' sheets and quilts because I sometimes forget, and kids certainly aren't going to remind you how long it's been since they've washed their bed sheets. So I have a checklist there to make sure that's getting done often enough. So on any given day, if I'm sitting around wondering, what am I supposed to be doing? I can always turn to the planner and find some idea. Or sometimes I can say, whoa, look at that. I've done everything I wanted to do before the afternoon. I have some time to sit down and cross stitch. Now let's transition over into talking about planting by the moon, something that may be more controversial, depending on your spirituality or religion or where your faith is at. So to me, it seemed a little woo-woo in the past, not something that I should be doing. But last year, I had some problems with different crops that I grew, or part of a crop would do good, and then something I did a little later would do better. And I was talking it over with this older couple that I know. They're in their 70s or 80s. And they have commercial farms, but they grow organically. They have, hundreds of acres, and they're very active in their farming. And the husband said to me when I was asking for advice on different stuff, he said, well, my wife always plants by the moon. So as fall went by and winter began, I had time to think about it and try to understand it more. I looked up a lot of videos. I purchased a real Farmer's Almanac book. I do prefer reading real books when I can. And I just wanted to understand it better. And from everything that I heard, the thoughts that it brought to my mind were, well, this makes sense because it just sounds like how the moon affects the tides. We know the tides can be timed perfectly. They're always on the same time, and the moon is what affects it. And we see a lot of things in nature, even in the female human body, that run on cycles and they repeat. And a lot of that's controlled, or all of it's controlled, by things that God has set in place. The days, the sun, the moon, the stars, the seasons. So if the waves can be pulled in and out with the moon, then is it possible also that the vitality can come up into plants and then go back down into the earth and go up and down in a cycle? I mean, we certainly know it's true for trees because the sap comes up and then goes down. And granted, that's once a year, but could it be possible that other plants are having it happen every month, up and down and up and down? And I know that might sound a little weird, and I have plenty of people around me that will be remonstrating with me if I start following any kind of astrology. I'm not interested in that. I just want to understand the plants better. And if there's a way that I can find to serve them better, and then they can serve me better by providing food, then I'm interested in that. And I would like to conduct a science experiment this year. And to the best that I understand planting by the moon, I'm going to be following it. I do firmly believe that nature is God's second book. And then we are to study into nature and to understand it better. And through doing that, we come to know our Creator better and trust Him more. So I'm not worried going into this that it's going to lead me off onto some dangerous spiritualistic path. I just want to learn more. In case you have no idea what I'm talking about, here's my simple example of what planting by the moon means. There's 28 days in the moon cycle. The first 14 days from the time the sky is dark, that's the new moon, until the moon is at its full brightness. Those first 14 days is called the waxing of the moon. And then the last 14 days from the time the moon is at its full brightness all the way around as it dims and comes back down to a dark night, that is called the waning of the moon. So if you're in the first 14 days as the moon's getting brighter, that's the best time to plant your above ground crops or seed things. And then as the moon's getting darker in the last 14 days, that's the best time to plant your root crops and the things that are going to produce food that you're going to eat, like potatoes, carrots, stuff under the ground. The other thing that's relevant is whether or not your crop is frost tender. So you have to look at the calendar and look at your frost dates and then time stuff around that. So for example, if I want to grow kale, I'm going to look at the back of the kale bag or seed envelope, and it's going to tell me the best time to transplant or direct seed. So if I wanted to transplant these 2 to 4 weeks, maybe 4 weeks before my last expected frost, I'm going to count back 4 weeks from that. And for me, it's like the end of April-ish. And then I'm going to look to make sure what phase of the moon I'm in. So from the new moon to the full moon is where I want to plant kale because it's an above ground crop. And if I look on the calendar, March 24th, 28th, 29th, and 30th is what they say are the best days, most fertile to plant during that phase of the moon. And then after that, I'm going to count back to start my seeds. So when I go back again, 3, 4, 5 weeks, somewhere in there where I want to plant my seeds, I'm going to find the phase of the moon again that is from the new moon to the full moon. And those dates in February look like the 20th, 21st, 24th, and then also March 1st and 2nd. So that gives you a flexible window for the weather and then looking ahead at the weather for when you want to start your seeds. And then I go again for fall, and August 22nd and 23rd look like good transplant days for the fall. And I count back to start my seeds, and that would be July 25th, 26th, and 27th. And when I look at my 2022 calendar, that fits in the time frame of when I was doing those things last year. I did plant my brassicas, a lot of them. I started them in July, transplanted them at the end of August, and they did terrific. But if I remember correctly, we did have a slightly cooler September, which benefited the brassicas. So just in case, I am going to also start some seeds mid-August and then transplant them in the correct dates in September in case we have a later summer and it stays warmer longer. I've actually been doing similar planning for some of my summer crops that are frost tender, such as tomatoes. Even though our average last frost date is late April, mid to late April, the last few years we've been getting frosts the first week in May. And so it's just not even safe to put tomatoes out until later in May, usually after Mother's Day. And what I've noticed is if I have my tomatoes that were started like early March, then by the time early May comes, they are not happy in pots anymore. They get root bound. They don't do as well when I transplant. And so I'm starting my tomato seeds a little later and a little later because I don't mind transplanting a small tomato plant, but I don't want to transplant a tomato plant that got way too big in a pot. So those are some things that I think about when I'm planning my seed starting dates. I will flip through my calendar now and show you what I have planned for each month for either starting a seed or transplanting a plant or direct seeding, direct planting stuff. I realize if you don't live in an area where I do, where around April 24th is your last spring frost, these dates won't be relevant to you. But if you do live in that kind of area, well, you're welcome to copy. You'll notice that I don't have anything written about when to expect a harvest or when to do harvesting. And that's because I don't want to pencil stuff in and then have to erase it later. I would rather, when I actually get to the date where I'm seeding something, on that day, I will then count forward and put an estimate on my calendar of when to start expecting harvests. Otherwise, if something happens and I can't do it on the day I plan to, then I would have a bunch of stuff written in my calendar that I have to go look forward and find and erase. So I filled in all my tentative plans, and then I will continue to fill in as I actually do them day by day, week by week. Congratulations if you made it this far. Hopefully I didn't blabber or go off topic too much, and maybe you found something helpful. Maybe you know something I don't know. Please share with me. Have you tried planting by the moon? Did you find out it's all hocus pocus? It doesn't really work? Were you scientific about it? Did you really stay strictly to the schedule? I'm going to try and plant some stuff with the schedule and some stuff not and see if it makes a difference. But that's it for my gardening work for this week. I'm going to go check on my onions. Aren't they beautiful and green? This was after 9 days of growth. I just love sitting in here and seeing something green in the middle of winter. If you haven't found something to smile about today, please do. Just stop what you're doing and think for a few minutes of things you're grateful for. Remember to live joyfully. And if this happens to be your first time visiting this channel, take a look over here. You might be interested to see how our garden has changed over the last 9 years.